Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day. So there is a lot to talk about today, and hopefully we can get through it without my voice being completely destroyed like it was yesterday, because I think in my excitement I was shouting the entire time. But in any event, yesterday, if you missed it, be sure to go check out that video. We talked a lot about all of the little hints and reveals that they showed us in the update about what's coming on the horizon, which to TLDR it is that the Wood Elves are going to be featuring as the main thrust for the next period, update, whatever you want to call it. So not only are they getting a Lord Pack DLC, but they're also getting a free DLC, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But the main focus of this video is going to be that we will be focusing instead on who they might be fighting. Now, in yesterday's video, I elaborated on why I think the Skaven are kind of the shoo-in, but we will tackle that here in just a minute to kind of reiterate it. But the first thing I need to do is I need to update an opinion I had on yesterday's video, which is that I had said in yesterday's video, we talked about who the free LC Wood Elf character could be. And I saw that I kind of skimmed over the post, and while I was skimming over the post, I saw that they had said that it was a her. So that pretty much narrowed it down to 3 characters. Queen Ariel, Drycha, the Briar Maven of Woe, and Nyeth the Prophetess. So I, looking at those 3, had felt that I wanted to put my bet on Nyeth. And then I spent some time looking at the post, and unfortunately, in my opinion, I made the mistake of spoiling it for myself, and now I'll spoil it for all of you, which is that Creative Assembly, whoever makes these posts, cannot help themselves when the opportunity for a pun arises. If you ever want to know what the next piece of content is, or the big secret that Creative Assembly is working on, apparently all you have to do is look for puns. At least that seems to be the case. Now, don't get me wrong, I would actually be kind of happy if this ends up being wrong, because this reveal coming through a pun just like destroys a part of my soul because of the relationship I have with puns. But just look at this line. You'll also get a bonus legendary lord with all the trimmings. Trimmings? Like trimming a tree? And then we can't wait to introduce you to her? It's Drycha. It's Drycha. Like, it's Drycha. Trimmings. Are you serious? There's a lot of language I would like to use in light of this discovery, but I'm not going to. It's so just, I hate it. Party Elite's gonna love it. I hate it. It's totally Drycha. It's gonna be Drycha. If it's not Drycha, then they will not have used a pun, and I will be able to rest in peace. But it's Drycha. They can't help it. Just like if you go to the bottom of the post, everyone's talking about the chaos and the bear with us. Very likely is alluding to Kislev and Chaos, because they just can't help themselves. It's like the Riddler in Batman. They just have this horrible compulsion to leave a clue, even if it spoils the fun. It's not like, oh, look at this cute little like or like cute hardcore piece of art we made that you have to like look for all the secret details. Nope, just wait for the puns. Anyway, so there you go. The free LC Lord is going to be Drycha. Mystery solved. Let's move on to the actual meat of this video. So like I said in yesterday's video, I feel pretty confident that this is going to be a Skaven versus Wood Elf Lord Pack. And you may be thinking, I didn't watch yesterday's video, why do you think it's Skaven? I'll just go ahead and quickly repeat it. Basically, on the post, they have flat out told us that it's going to be the Wood Elves versus a core race from Total War Warhammer 2, which means it has to be either Lizardmen, High Elves, Dark Elves, or Skaven. Now, High Elves just had a DLC, so I don't think it's going to be High Elves, so we can go ahead and toss them out. Dark Elves, or Lizardmen, I don't think work very well as a Wood Elf antagonist, because there's just not really a reason for the two of them to fight. Of all of the races in Warhammer Fantasy, the Lizardmen and the Wood Elves are two of the closest aligned as far as like what their objectives are and what they're trying to do. So I just can't fathom a way that would happen. So they're out. And that would leave the Dark Elves and the Skaven. And the Dark Elves, to me, just don't really have a super obvious DLC waiting right now. And more importantly, the Dark Elves don't really have any big beef with the Wood Elves. There has been conflicts between the two, but they almost all revolve around Morathi. And that's already said and done. So I don't think that's the case, and then that leaves the Skaven. And the Skaven make perfect sense, because the Skaven and the Wood Elves have been antagonists, or enemies, for centuries, if not longer. You know, when the Skaven unleashed the Red Pox on Bretonnia, and they eventually, like, surged up from below to try and take it over, it was the Wood Elves who rode out to Bretonnia's aid and actually helped them beat the Skaven back. There have been numerous times where the Skaven have tried to invade Athel Loren to, you know, get into it from below, because if the Skaven could get away with harvesting all of the natural magical resources of Athel Loren, the result would be devastating for the world and Athel Loren itself. And the Wood Elves are keenly aware of this threat of the Skaven, and they go pretty out of their way to deal with them when possible. I mean, I told you guys that story when we did the Wood Elf Q&A. We did the Ogre Kingdoms Q&A. I read out a story where the Wood Elves literally used up some like pretty clever tricks to basically bribe an ogre tribe into wiping out like an entire Skaven warren for them. But the Wood Elf book, and especially the Wood Elf book timeline, so to speak, is full of the Wood Elves fighting the Skaven over and over and over and over again. There's a lot of animosity there. So first, let me explain what do I think the DLC will revolve around. And I actually have a pretty clever answer. So if it's Skaven, there's only 2 Skaven characters left who I think are worthy of DLCs, which are Thanquol and Bone Ripper, and then Throt the Unclean. And we know Creative Assembly has already flat out said that Thanquol will not be in Total War Warhammer until the 3rd game. And I have my theories as to why that's the case, but that's not important right now. So we know it's not Thanquol. That only leaves Throt the Unclean. And that also makes sense because really the only greater clan that is not completely fleshed out at this point is Clan Moulder, which is my favorite clan. So I think we are looking at Clan Moulder versus the Wood Elves. So why would Clan Moulder be taking on the Wood Elves, you may be thinking? Or it's like, you know, they're way up in Hell Pit, isn't that kind of far away, yada yada. Well, obviously Clan Moulder roves all around the world looking for ways to improve their craft, to make bigger, badder monsters, to make scarier creations, to make more horrible mutations. And there's a little thing in Athel Loren that I think Clan Moulder would be obsessed with trying to obtain if they knew it existed, which maybe, for the sake of this little storyline, they find out about, or at least Throt the Unclean finds out about. So what do I think the narrative will be about? Granted, this is a total shot in the dark, but I think the actual narrative of the DLC, the Lord Pack, is going to be that Throt the Unclean somehow has discovered the existence of a really, really potent set of artifacts known as the Acorns of Ages. Now, if the name doesn't give it away, the Acorns of Ages are literal acorns that during like the height of Athel Loren, so like the best time of spring towards summer, when the weave is at its strongest, like the natural life cycle, the winds of Gyran, which are the winds of life, will blow super strong around the Oak of Ages. And this wind will basically make this almost tornado of life magic that's just the largest gathering of it in the world. And it basically super saturates the Oak of Ages into its acorns. And these acorns just absorb this colossal, titanic amount of magical energy, of life magic. And eventually they drop off. And these acorns are so potently powerful that if they are to be planted, they will basically sprout like a massive full-grown oak in a matter of seconds. But the reason the Wood Elves actually consider them practically sacred artifacts is because the real thing they do that's spooky is what happened the one time the Wood Elves did not gather up the acorns fast enough. Because now they're very like chop chop on making sure those things get gathered up safely. Ariel's handmaidens. And so what happened was that a single squirrel, not with any magical powers, not any kind of like weird forest spirit, just a squirrel. Well, this squirrel decided accidentally to eat one of the Acorns of Ages. And in a matter of seconds, the squirrel grew to such a colossal size that just by walking around, it proceeded to almost flatten the entirety of the Kingsglade, which is, a pretty prominent kingdom. And it was such a terror, like a kaiju tier threat to Athel-Loren, that it took 3 of the, I think, 12 kingdoms of Athel-Loren, 3 of the kingdoms, or the realms, had to unite their armies to take down a frickin' squirrel. So what do you think would happen if Throt the Unclean got his hands on that thing? If Throt the Unclean got his hands on an Acorn of Ages, imagine what kind of horrible monstrosity he could make. He could literally create a rat ogre the size of a mountain, or like a hell pit abomination much larger than that. I mean, if he were to make a monster using an Acorn of Ages, it would be one of the most powerful creatures in existence. And that's before he does all of his usual tricks to augment it further, using Warpstone and all the other horrible techniques that he's learned over his lifetime. So that's pretty freaking terrifying in my opinion. And I think that would be the center of a really cool conflict between those factions. Even on the Vortex campaign. On the Vortex campaign, you have this big showdown between some Wood Elf group that has journeyed out to the New World to maybe because one of these acorns has been lost, or like a group of Wood Elves that went out with it, that maybe they took an Acorn of Ages to like revive some important forest somewhere in the world, or reconnect the Oak of Ages with some of the world roots somehow, and Throt found out about it, and maybe the race is on now between the Wood Elves to try and revive this important forest, or a set of important forests, and Throt the Unclean is going after the Wood Elves to try and kill them all and take the Acorns of Ages for himself, so he can use their amazingly potent power for his own devious creations. That could be a pretty serious conflict. I mean, that would literally be a disaster tier scenario for the world if Throt the Unclean managed to pull that off, and the Wood Elves would be very invested in making sure he didn't pull it off. So I think that could be the conflict, or at least that's my proposal for it. So now let's get on to the actual big stuff. The actual DLC. So I wanted to do a video today talking about Clan Moulder and everything I think that could be in it. Then maybe tomorrow we'll talk about like Drycha, and maybe the day after that we'll talk about some of the Wood Elf Lords. So today we're going to focus on Clan Moulder. So obviously the legendary lord is going to be Throt the Unclean. Period, end of story. Throt the Unclean, for anyone who's not aware, Throt the Unclean is my favorite Skaven character. Well, besides Thanquol, I guess. And he's this bloated, nasty, mutated monster who is one of the 9 ruling lords of Hell Pit. And he has many cool achievements to his name. But, I'll have some pictures of him going by. But he's basically, like many Skaven, he's practiced his own arts on himself to considerable degree. Ikit Claw built his own suit of armor. Lord Skrulk infects himself with all those diseases. Well, old Throt decided to do was mutate the hell out of himself with really intense warpstone augmentation. And what happened is that the big thing that Throt accomplished was that whether he did it on purpose or accident is up for debate, but he basically overclocked his metabolism to an insane degree. And it's so bad because Skaven already have a really high metabolism, which allows them to be like super fast and kind of almost see things in slow motion and react really quickly to all this stuff. But he overclocked his. But the downside to that is Skaven have something known as the Black Hunger, which the Black Hunger is that whenever Skaven like expend a lot of energy, like say in fighting, they get possessed by like this horrifying hunger that will literally kill them if they don't satisfy it fast enough. Well, for most Skaven, it's like if they don't eat after exerting themselves heavily in battle, or because they had a lot of adrenaline going, or because whatever reason, it takes quite a bit to work up the Black Hunger. But when it settles on them, it's pretty nasty, and it'll drive them into like a killing frenzy, if not sated. Well, Throt the Unclean overclocked his metabolism so bad that if he stops chewing, so like if he's not constantly stuffing his face with food and he gets to the point where he like doesn't have anything new to put in his mouth after he swallows, then he will immediately start to suffer the effects of the Black Hunger, and his is way worse. His is known as the Ravening Hunger. So he is like always eating, which is why he's so fat. He's this big fat rat because he's just constantly gorging himself. He's a glutton in the extreme, and I relate so much to that. But let's talk about how he might function in game. So Throt the Unclean is probably I would say he is easily the most skilled Skaven when it comes to fighting in close combat, next to like Queek Headtaker and Deathmaster Snitch. Like those guys are obviously more skilled as they're purified combat lords, but Throt makes up for it by being he is quite large, but his big thing is he's fast. Throt is a fairly quick Skaven for his size. Like he's not faster than like a warlord per se, but for how big he is, he's alarmingly quick. And he can attack a lot because he has 3 arms instead of 2, which allows him to wield a pretty scary amount of weapons. In that he normally wields, he has a 2-handed weapon called Creature Killer. And Creature Killer is a magic weapon that is basically like, I don't know if you've ever seen a man catcher, but there are these things that exist a lot. I've seen a lot of them over in like far eastern countries. But man catchers are kind of like these poles. Well, you'll see a picture of it here. It's this big like trap thing he has. But Throt upgraded his to being the Creature Killer, which he has covered in all these nasty unguents and stuff. And he's made it so big that he can actually like catch the throat of like a freaking rat ogre in it easily. So obviously, I think Throt the Unclean is probably going to have a very large anti-large bonus. Like he's probably going to be a nightmare when going up against monsters or cavalry and stuff. So he's going to have a ton of anti-large. And then in his 3rd arm, he carries the Whip of Domination. And so the Whip of Domination is a longer range weapon, though I imagine it'll just be close combat range. And the big thing that it does is if he hits you with it, he covers it in like this super horrific, he covers it in this like really nasty set of chemicals and other things that he's created. Because like, I want to say the lash teeth are made from, I can actually look this up real quick. The lash teeth are made from, yes, it's a special whip. It's made from Minotaur hide. But the big thing is that it's the whip is cured in troll digestive juices. It is designed to just cause the maximum amount of pain. And basically what it does is that if it hits you, it demoralizes you. So I imagine the way Throt's going to work is that his Creature Killer is going to give him like a ton of anti-large, and the Whip of Domination is going to give him the Discourage effect whenever he hits somebody with it. So really, really excited to see that. As for like the rest of his design, Throt does not have much in the way of armor. Like he only wore light armor, so he'll probably have like somewhere between 30 to 50 armor, not too much. But he has regeneration. And everybody knows that regeneration lords are super scary and tend to be very, very good. So that'll be super sexy. Other rules that he has, he causes fear because he's pretty scary and large and bloated and nasty. So causing fear is always a bonus. And I don't know how they're going to do his other two rules. He has one called Master Controller, which is basically just that he's like really, really good at controlling rat ogres and giant rats and stuff, which I imagine that's probably just going to be a buff type ability he has. I don't know if it's going to be like a single target or maybe he can only use it on monsters. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I imagine it's going to be some kind of single target or AoE leadership buff that he can use to keep all the scary monsters fighting and stuff. Maybe it'll be like the buff that the Dark Elf High Beastmasters have. And then the last rule he has is his Ravening Hunger. That, I have no idea how it's going to work, because Ravening Hunger was a rule that basically just meant that Throt had regeneration, but it's conditional, being that the regen comes from the fact that his body is like constantly metabolizing and healing and regenerating really fast. But the downside to it is that Throt had to be constantly eating. So like he would have to take a leadership check, and if he failed, he would have to eat one of an allied model. And if he doesn't eat something, then he would just take damage as his hunger like literally starts consuming his own body without getting his regen. So I doubt Ravening Hunger is gonna, like, I'm sure it'll be a thing, but it's probably not going to be recognizable to the way it worked in tabletop, because generally the game, they don't put in like pure debuffs. Anyway, so that's Throt the Unclean. Oh, also fun fact about Throt is that this guy is so crazy and so casual with Warpstone that he was in a fight with one of his like fellows, someone of the same class as him back in the day, and his left eyeball got ripped out. So Throt the Unclean, being a casually intelligent member of society, decided the best way to replace this eyeball was by taking a hunk of warpstone and literally hammering it into his eye socket. So he has this big old shard of warpstone sticking out of his head, and it's very noted in his lore that it's like poisoning his brain, but it may well be the reason he's able to come up with a lot of the nasty stuff he's come up with. Because, fun fact, the reason Throt the Unclean is one of the 9 Lords of Hell Pit is Throt the Unclean was the Skaven who invented the Hell Pit Abomination. So if you like Hell Pit Abominations or you hate Hell Pit Abominations, Throt the Unclean is who you have to thank for it. He is a really, really ingenious flesh crafter, but he's terrifying. On to the new Lord unit. I think the new Lord choice for the Skaven is going to be the Master Moulder, which the Master Moulder originally in tabletop was basically like a glorified unit champion, but seeing as they made like the ancient Kroxigor into a Lord choice, I'm pretty sure, and they seem to like, Creative Assembly seems to be like dead set on Lord packs introducing new Lords and heroes, or at least new Lords. So we're probably going to see the Master Moulder as a new Lord. I imagine it's going to be an anti-large focused Lord who's in combat and is probably all about, they'll probably have Thing Catchers, which are like a smaller version of the creature killer that Throt the Unclean uses. So they'll probably either have they'll either have Thing Catchers or whips, or maybe like a combination of the two. Thing Catchers are traditionally two-handed weapons, but maybe they'll do something else with them. But you could either give them a whip or a Thing Catcher. And actually, a Master Moulder could have a couple of other options too. I want to say they had like an Electro Whip, if memory solves. Yeah, you could give them a Beast Prod, which a Beast Prod, you could have an Electro Whip or a Shock Prod. So maybe they'll have one of those. If they do either of those, that would be kind of cool. If they did the Shock Prod or the Electro Whip, it would probably just be like a super armor-piercing weapon. The Shock Prod is kind of a little more designed for like big things, whereas the Electro Whip is more for like large groups of units. But seeing as like most of the lords we have now for the Skaven, especially I feel like the Master Assassin is much more up the anti-infantry side of things. So maybe the best way to do a Master Moulder Lord would be to give him like a Shock Prod or a Things Catcher and just be like, look, he's anti-large. So that's probably how he's going to work. I imagine they'll be mostly defensive focused. I don't think they're going to have regen, but they're probably going to have like a lot of monster buffs. and maybe we'll be on the cheaper end of things. Then for the new hero option, I think the new hero is going to be the Packmaster, which I think the Packmaster is going to be more about having a whip, because they weren't allowed to carry anything bigger than a whip. So I think the Packmasters will have whips, like a whip in one hand and a sword in the other hand, and they'll have some really cool synergies, like little leadership buffs and stuff, especially for monsters. And maybe they'll be able to make something like rat ogres or giant rats and some of the other units we're going to talk about later. Maybe they can make them unbreakable. I think a really cool ability I'd like to see is maybe for all of these guys, so like the Packmaster, the Master Moulder, and Throt the Unclean, I would love to see them get an ability that has to do with rat swarms. So maybe they could get, they could just call it Rat Swarm, and it could be like they cast a vortex, or they cast like a little ability where like a bunch of small rats come out and just do like damage or slow people down and stuff. Because rat swarms should be represented in the game somehow, which I don't believe they currently are. Because a lot of armies have swarms, but obviously swarms are not in Total War Warhammer, but all of them have been represented in different ways. For instance, you can see the bat swarms for the undead. If you play as the Vampire Coast, they're one of their, whatever you do for a province, one of the, like, edicts. And then the Tomb Kings obviously have Scarab Swarms as one of their army abilities. The Lizardmen have Serpent Swarms, or Jungle Swarms, if you play using a Ark of Sotek, or if you just play with Ten Juan's faction. So I would really love to see rat swarms be an ability for the Clan Moulder guys. On from the characters, we have the actual units. So for the new units, I think it's going to be... Oh, wait, we gotta do mounts first. So I do think there's going to be 2 new mounts introduced to the Skaven. The first is going to be the Great Pox Rat, which I am really, really hoping we're going to get. The Great Pox Rat is essentially, it's just a very, it's kind of like a demigriff-sized rat that's really gross. Because it generally has to go through like some really, really nasty mutations and like borderline diseases and other just super nasty, nasty stuff in order to be functional as a mount. And I actually want to just double check the story behind it, but because if I remember correctly, I believe it's just like a giant rat that's been like gorged on its fellows. But let me double check the page. In any event, I hope you're all having a really good day and you've been really enjoying yourselves. Oh, you know what? I think he's at the beginning because they put all the mounts at the beginning. I really hope we get a war litter one day, but I don't know if we're ever gonna get a war litter, even though I want it so bad. There's also rat hounds, but I don't think we're ever gonna see rat hounds as playable. I think the rat hounds technically already show... Ah, here we go. The Great Pox Rat. Yeah, so a Great Pox Rat is literally just a giant rat that has been just pumped with grafts, like hide grafts onto its body and growth agents until they become like massive, overweight, obese horses that have like super nasty fangs and stuff, but they're much larger than horses. They're much more akin to a demigriff in size. So well, not a demigriff, but maybe like a, what's a good, like, bigger than a horse, but smaller than a demigriff. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but they're very large. Without being massive. So I would really like to see the Great Pox Rat as a mount option for warlords, for like just Skaven warlords. Maybe also they could give it to like the Master Moulder or the probably not the Packmaster. I feel like the Packmasters aren't good enough because it takes a Master Moulder to create a Great Pox Rat. But I think the Great Pox Rat would be an awesome mount. They're just big, you know. They're essentially would give you like a monstrous cav type unit. Or character, but you would be able to give that to warlords, Master Moulders, or Throt the Unclean, by my reckoning, and they get poison attacks, so that's super cool. Then the other mount you have is the Brood Horror, and you know what? Why don't we save this till we actually get to the unit section? So anyway, starting on new units. The first new unit I think that we're gonna get for Clan Moulder are giant rats, and giant rats are basically just like dog-sized rats. They are numerous, but they're super duper cheap. They're not really good at anything, but they're freakishly fast and vaguely suicidal. So I think the big thing for giant rats would be that they would just be a super cheap unit that maybe you'd be able to get some really cool buffs on, and something we'll kind of talk about later. The only like special rule I could really see them having is maybe something called Wave of Rats, which if they have it active, maybe it's like if their leadership is stable, so their leadership isn't wavering, they get like some bonuses to their combat stats or something like that, or maybe they like are able to stretch wider than any other unit, because Wave of Rats was basically just that when giant rats attack, they swarm over each other, so they're able to attack you with a lot more models normally. But giant rats, once again, super duper dirt cheap unit, but they're not like itty bitty rats. They're literally like war dog size. So I think they would kind of be like, I don't think they'd be like dire wolves necessarily in function, because I think they'd be more about numbers and cheapness than like speed, and their stats would probably be a little worse. But maybe they would just be like dire wolves or chaos warhounds, but just with worse stats and lower leadership to make them cheaper. The second unit I think that we're going to see are wolf rats. I love wolf rats. And wolf rats are super duper scary. They're considered to be around the size of like ice wolves, so they are bigger than you would expect. They're larger than most wolves. And they're these really horrific hybrid creatures between a wolf and a rat. Though the funniest thing about them is Clan Moulder doesn't actually remember how they were created, likely because whoever it was that created the wolf rats was killed and devoured by his own creation. But the scary thing about wolf rats is, unlike all of the other things that Clan Moulder tends to create, wolf rats are a self-sustaining species. So they are literally a perfect creation that's able to propagate like so fast that the Skaven can barely control their population a lot of the time. But Clan Moulder has made them into a super effective unit. And they are very, very scary and traditionally could come with some really nasty upgrades. So I imagine like the regular version is probably just going to be like really, really powerful, freakishly fast, kind of like Norscan Ice Wolves, but probably without any special abilities. But in tabletop, you could upgrade them to have magical and armor-piercing attacks. You could upgrade them to have poisoned attacks. And you could upgrade them to be bloated, which if you upgraded them to be bloated, it literally made them like these gross fat things that when they died would, like, they were just nasty looking. So I could see maybe there being a Regiment of Renown version that we'll talk about later. But for the wolf rats, I would think for the regular version, they'll probably just go with, like, maybe they'll give them poisoned attacks as a base version. But I think the base version might just be pretty chill. And they'll probably have two special rules to make them really unique outside of having, like, really, really fast and hit kind of hard. And I think the big rules is they'll have something called Tide of Death and something called Go for the Throat. Which Go for the Throat, which I could see easily being a tech or a passive, but Go for the Throat should basically just be that they have a massive charge bonus. So, like, whenever they go in for the charge, kind of like how Snotling Pump Wagons have the Pump Harder passive, where when they come into charge every once in a while, they get like a massive bonus if it's not on cooldown. I would do the same thing for the rat wolves. Wolf rats. And then Tide of Death is basically just like it's just like another way of the rat swarm for the or wave of rats for the giant rats. So maybe just something where if they have their leadership is stable, they have some kind of bonus to their stats, or they're better about fighting wider or something like that. But those are their design. And then after that, I would see Great Pox Rats. Maybe we get like Great Pox Rats as just a unit. That would be kind of cool. They'd be like a kind of fat, not super fast moving, but reasonably tanky little group of guys who deal poison damage and are a little sticky, and tough. Maybe they could do decent damage, but they're not too crazy. But then again, I could see Great Pox Rats just being a mount, and that's fine. But the big boy is the Brood Horror, which I'll have plenty of images up here that you can enjoy. The Brood Horror, it's a favorite creature of many, many people, especially those who are super aware of the Skaven. But the brood horror is a monstrous-sized giant rat. So it's literally, you take a giant rat and you force feed it growth hormones and you graft a bunch of extra flesh onto it until they become great pox rats. And then if you have a group of great pox rats where one of the great pox rats starts, or sometimes they're called giant pox rats, by the way, but they're the interchangeable. So sometimes they're called great pox rats, sometimes they're called giant pox rats. But if in that pack of pox rats, one of them eats all of the other ones, and when I say eat, they tend to eat each other whole because their jaws can like distend and stretch really wide. So it's noted that like to create a brood horror, a pox rat has to eat all of its other brethren. And because it will eat a lot of them whole, you can literally like see the other pox rats inside the one that ate them all, like trying to claw their way out through its flesh because its belly's all distended and gross and stuff. They're nasty creatures. But when it finishes growing, a brood horror is literally just a monstrous-sized giant rat. You know, we're talking like griffin-sized giant rat. Like, these things are huge. They're huge, they're fat, they're ugly, and because they're just a very, very large great pox rat, they, of course, come with poisoned attacks, because they have all that nasty... because their body is like so full of like growth hormones and stuff, they have regeneration, which is super cool. So already you've got poison, you've got regen, they cause terror, which is awesome, and they're a monster. So they're really, really big, they have a ton of health, they can hit really hard on a charge and like throw people around really easily. And then they have a couple of fun special rules outside of those. They have a special rule called Foul Ichor, or Ichor, blood, which is essentially just that when a when a brood horror dies, its body basically like bursts in this like disgusting wave of like vile blood, all sorts of dangerous contaminants, rats, and all these things that have been like living inside of its body. So when it dies, it should basically just like blow up and deal damage to everyone around it. I think that would be really, really cool and nasty. Or maybe it could be that it dies and like a unit of giant rats comes like pouring out or something. But it could be upgraded over in tabletop. So maybe the mount version, or maybe there will be multiple versions because there's an armored version. So you could have a Skaven brood horror, but you could also upgrade it to have armor. So it literally has like plate armor on it. So maybe like if you have the regular brood horror as just the standalone monster, it does not have armor, and maybe it'll have like the pestilent breath ability, which pestilent breath is literally just like they have like a nasty breath attack. So maybe it could be like they have kind of like the Terrorgeist shriek or dragon breath or something, but they just vomit out this nasty gas. And then if you take a warlord, or I think a warlord, the Master Moulder, and Throt the Unclean. I do think Throt should be allowed to ride a brood horror. I think that would be awesome. So I would be really, really enjoyed to see that. But you could have like a warlord, Master Moulder, or Throt, or maybe just the warlords and Throt. But they could ride the brood horror, and if they ride it, maybe then it gets the armor plating, so it's a little more durable as a mount. But I love that idea. And the last thing that I could really see coming into the game for Clan Moulder is called the Rat Mother. Because a lot of people ask, I think, about female Skaven. They want to know about female Skaven. Here, let me show you a picture of a female Skaven. It's an old picture, but the last time we really saw Rat Mothers focused on by Games Workshop was during the Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition roleplay. They were a monster in the Children of the Horned Rat expansion. And Rat Mothers, as you might guess, are just female Skaven. But they are these colossal, hideous, disgusting creatures. They're these big, bloated, just nasty-ass monsters that are massive and incredibly dangerous. I would say that a brood horror is a little bit... I would say a brood horror is larger than a Rat Mother, but a Rat Mother is definitely larger than a Great Pox Rat. So they're just these big, disgusting monsters, and they could really just go with whatever they wanted as far as its abilities. Like, if they wanted to get super nasty with it, you could literally have an ability where, like, it births Skaven on the battlefield, so it like summons a unit of giant rats or summons a unit of plant rats or something. That could be super disgusting. And of course, rat mothers, they are female Skaven, so Skaven are actually fiercely protective of them and tend to go like freaking nuts if somebody tries to hurt one, just because they realize how important it is to their species. And it's kind of like a primal instinct. So maybe the rat mother could have an ability where like if she's below 50% health, it gives like a big damage buff, or like just a temporary powerful buff to nearby units, kind of like how Thorgrim has the High King ability. Maybe the rat mother could have a passive where like if she's below a certain health threshold, it buffs all Skaven in the area, maybe either for a little bit or maybe until she dies. You know, that could be awesome. And maybe if she dies, all the Skaven nearby get like frenzy for a little bit, but lose themselves to what do you call it? Not rampage. Like that would be amazing. But the rampage bit might be a little too far. Anyway, let's keep moving on. When it comes to the regiments of renown, personally, I'm really hoping we're going to see, I think for the regiments of renown, I really want a regiment of renown Hell Pit Abomination. I don't care what it's based on. I don't care what it does. I just want a regiment of renown Hell Pit Abomination. I also think you could do a regiment of renown Wolf Rat unit that either could be, it has poison if the regular ones don't. And if the regular ones do have poison, maybe it could have Warpstone Teeth or Warpstone Fangs, whatever that upgrade's called. And, Warpstone Shard Teeth is what the upgrade's called. So maybe these wolf rats, in addition to having poison, would have magical and armor-piercing attacks. Just because armor-piercing on them would be terrifying. And then, for another regiment of renown, maybe we could get something like a rat ogre unit or whatever. Or just a unit of giant rats that explode or, go crazy with it. Another thing I want to talk about is actually a legendary hero opportunity. Y'all know that I've been going really hard lately on having legendary heroes introduced more into the game. So I'm not going to wax super lyrical on this because I haven't done the Skaven episode yet, but I would really like it if we could get Squeal Gnawtooth as a legendary hero as part of this DLC. I would love Squeal Gnawtooth to be available to all Skaven factions, not just Clan Moulder. Obviously we'll see what happens, but I'm not going to talk anymore about him because I have the Hero of Legend video for the Skaven coming up very soon, so just stay tuned for that. But I would love to see Squeal Gnawtooth show up as a legendary hero. I think he would just be an excellent addition, and with him in the game, we would literally have every single Skaven character in the game already. The only playable tabletop character we would be missing is Thanquol, who we know is coming in Game 3. And then I guess technically Screech Vermin King if you want to include the end times, but I'm not. So yeah. And then the last thing I want to talk about is what I think the new mechanic will be for Clan Moulder. I think the big mechanic for Clan Moulder is going to be flesh crafting, which I think will be like a laboratory, or it'll be a menu you can open, kind of like Ikit Claw's workshop. But instead of augmenting Scryer units, you're going to be augmenting Moulder units. You're going to be augmenting your monsters. And I think the best way they can make this work is, instead of it, and to make it different, because I don't want it to be a copy pasta of Ikit Claw's workshop. I think that would be kind of lazy and dumb. Even though it would be very powerful, but I wouldn't like it from an originality standpoint. So instead of it just, because Ikit Claw's workshop is you earn the ingredients you need, and you just click buttons to give permanent upgrades to your guys, and you're done. What I would really like to see with the flesh crafting for Clan Moulder, or mutating, depending on what you want to, what it's called, but it'll probably be called flesh crafting. But I would really like to see it be that for Clan Moulder, you have to get like ingredients, or like you have to like either accomplish missions to get like the base materials you need, or you need to like kill enemies to capture flesh, or maybe you need to like get resources or whatever. But however it does it, you collect what you need, and you should be, I think the coolest thing would be able to be to create your own regiments of renown. So like you would open the workshop, and at different levels you would have access to like new tiers of monsters. So maybe at a level 1 flesh crafting laboratory, you would only have access to like upgrading giant rats, and that'd be it. But But you could, and maybe not all of their upgrades would be available at once, but you could say like, okay, if you have enough of this resource, you can make a giant rat unit that has poison attacks. Or you can make a giant rat unit that has armor piercing attacks. Or a giant rat unit that has flaming attacks. Or and maybe when you upgrade it to like the second level, it opens up so you have access to wolf rats now and rat ogres. So then you'd be able to give them upgrades, and it could get wild, you know, not just stat and ability stuff. So maybe at first it starts off pretty simple, like, oh, you can give them, you know, sharper fang or enlarged fangs, so they have higher melee attack, armor piercing damage, yada yada. Or maybe you could give them like diseased claws, so they have poisoned attacks and higher base weapon strength. But then maybe at the later tiers you could get super wild stuff. Like you could have like, oh, whenever these giant rats die, they explode in like a cloud of diseased flesh and nastiness. So they're like that Phoenix Scar Regiment of Renown unit, where when they die, they blow up and it deals damage. Or maybe you could have rat ogres that have like bone rattling shrieks, and it gives them the demoralizing penalty on enemy units that they hit in close combat, and they cause terror. Or maybe you could have, like, you know, just augments to allow you to just take a regular unit and just create something, like, super fucking cool and insane. You know, you're like, oh man, not only do I have a Hell Pit Abomination, but now that I'm at, like, the top tier, so, like, you start off with maybe giant rats and, I don't know, something else, and then, or wolf rats, and then at tier 2 you get, like, the rat ogres and the rat mother, and then at tier 3 you get like the brood horror and the hell pit abomination to upgrade. And by the end of the campaign, you're throwing around bullshit like, I've got a hell pit abomination that can breathe out a cloud of venom like a dragon shooting attack, and it does magic damage with increased melee defense, and like it has a guaranteed chance to get its heals instead of dying when it gets to super low health. Like, you could just go nuts with it. I think that would be the coolest freaking thing in the universe, and would really help Clan Moulder have some really cool style. And I also think that would be a great mechanic, because you could recycle it for the I think you could recycle it for other factions down the line. Like, I would love to see a Vampire Count DLC that opens up fleshcraft, or I forget what the vampires call it, but essentially flesh crafting for the Necrarchs, where they like create their own undead abominations, because that's a big thing from the second edition roleplay and just like Necrarchs in general, is that they invent new types of undead by like stitching creatures together and using necromancer to create horrible abominations. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you all really enjoyed it. Let me know of what you think of everything down below, whether it be the reason for, I think these two are going to be fighting, Throt being the legendary lord, the lord, Master Moulder Lord, Packmaster hero, new mounts being the great Pox Rat, giant Pox Rat, whatever you want to call it, and brood horror, new units like the giant rats, wolf rats, great Pox Rats, brood horror, rat mother, maybe seeing Squeal Gnawtooth in there somewhere, and the flesh crafting mechanic. So I hope you all have a great day. I'm so excited. I really think that's what this is going to be about. Not the narrative, but like Clan Moulder versus Wood Elves. I really hope that's what it's going to be about, because I'm so ready for Hell Pit. Clan Moulder is easily one of my favorite factions in all of Warhammer Fantasy, and I'm so ready to play them. And Throt the Unclean. He's so awesome, and I just relate to him on a spiritual level. But in any event, that's going to be me for today. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll be seeing you soon with more stuff. We're now that we've had stuff revealed to us, we're busy. We're busy season. So have a great day, guys.